Hello everyone, welcome to another Unity tutorial. This time we are going to be working on a project called the Plane Simulator because we just finished working on 3 weeks of 2D Unity, and now as you can see in the syllabus we're going to move on for the next 3 weeks into something I like to call the Plane Simulator. It's really more of a game than a simulator, but it's just a name difference. And also I have listed here publishing games for this week. If you go on Canvas for this week, you'll see 4 videos I've put here, which I'll publish in an hour or so, that go over publishing your games to different sites. And there's no homework or anything related to this, it's just for your use if you decide to publish your games in the future. Okay, so if we hop over here into Unity, I would like to keep this video to like 10 to 15 minutes. I know I said that last week and it ended up being like half an hour, but this time it'll be quicker, I promise. So let's get into it. So what's the goal for today? I want to create a scene using Unity's built-in terrain tool, make a plane and have it fly around with some nice easy controls, and also maybe add like an explosion particle effect at the end if we have time. Okay. But like I said, there will be 3 weeks of content here during the whole plane simulator, so we can take it slow if we need to. Alright, let's go ahead and add a terrain to start with. We'll do that by going to 3D Object, Terrain. Actually terrain's a perfect name. And we get this huge checkered grid. Our camera was over here by default. You can see it's very massive. I think the size is actually fine, but what we need to do is we need to put it somewhere in the middle. And I can move our camera or I can just move the terrain, so I'm just going to move the terrain. -500. -500 is going to put our camera right in the middle. And I'm going to actually drop that down a bit, probably like -30 should be good. Okay, and I've prepared these 3 images. I just downloaded them on a website I found on Google earlier. Just some textures for grass, rock, and snow, because we're going to actually be painting this terrain with these textures. So with the built-in terrain object, you can go over here into the component and choose the paint terrain option. There are a few other options that we'll get into probably in a future tutorial, but for this paint terrain tool, you can go over here down to edit terrain layers, create layer, and then we're going to add one for each of these objects here. And the first layer that you do, it sort of blankets the terrain. If I go in super close, you can see that there is actually a nice little grass texture, even though it sort of blends together when you zoom out. I'm going to add another one here for rocks and another one for our snow, and we're going to use our brushes to create mountains. Okay, but instead of the paint texture, I'm going to go over to, these are all pretty useful by the way, but the raise and lower terrain tool. I'm going to zoom out really far. Oh, not that far. Probably around here. Okay, and I'm going to start raising our terrain. That raises it way too much. I'm going to decrease the opacity so that way it increases it by smaller amounts. What I want to do is, actually, I'm going to raise all of the terrain so I can create valleys. And I will increase the opacity a little bit more, increase the ridges so that way I can create this sort of crater. Okay, and I'm just sort of moving it up ever so slightly. There are different brushes, like if you wanted more scattered, rigid area like this, you would use a tool something like this, and then if I increase the opacity a lot more, I can get actual mountainous looking mountains. Probably a little bit more even. Okay. Let's get some big mountains. Okay, that's probably good for now. And now what I want to do is I'm going to paint these mountains with our rock color. Oops, terrain, paint texture. I'm going to fly up here for a second. I'm going to select our this layer here, move down towards our brush again, keep the opacity high, and the brush I'll make about this high as well. Let's grab this, should be good, and just start painting. Now all the mountainy areas I'm going to turn gray, and of course I'm no artist. In fact, that was horrible. There we go. Okay, let's paint this side. And I'll try to do this quickly. Okay. Not very pretty, but you get the idea. And then on top of that, if you can probably guess, we're going to add our snow layer. I don't like the solid look for this snow, so I'm going to sort of sprinkle it on top. The opacity is still pretty high. Okay, I feel like that's pretty good. What does it look like from down low? And of course we're just creating a scene for our plane to fly around. That's pretty good. Good enough. Okay, so now with our terrain, I'm going to actually look at where my camera is. It's way down underneath the terrain here. Let's go ahead and actually move that. I'm going to move him up here, above the terrain. I'm looking over at this main camera view here. Let's start with a view of this middle mountain. So I feel like that'd be pretty cool. Right about there seems pretty good. Alright, so now let's go ahead and actually add a plane. And I might worry about making a good looking plane in Magic of Voxel or something next tutorial, but for this time let's just add a cube. I'll call it airplane. Sounds pretty good. I'm going to reset that, drag it to about where our camera is. Okay, I'm going to actually drag the camera onto the airplane, reset the transform there, and so now our camera is right in the middle of our cube, and I'll give it a little offset by dragging it back, still looking at the viewfinder for reference, and give it sort of like a top-down view, and I'll rotate it along the X to sort of give it this look. I'll play it in full screen, and I feel like that's pretty good for now. But now let's actually add put at least a little bit more effort in. I'm gonna right click on airplane, add another cube, and I'm gonna, well, first I'll rename this airplane part. But for our actual airplane, I'm going to elongate it along this axis, make it sort of like a cylinder, even though I could have just added the cylinder object. I didn't do that. Okay. What does the plane look like? I'll give it sort of a wing, even though it's not, doesn't really look like it yet. There we go. Let's see if I can remember what planes look like. Okay, I'm going to copy this, move this back here. Planes have one of these, right? Yeah. I'll do this once more. And if you're uninterested in this part, you can go ahead and skip it. Let's actually give this one a little rotation. Yeah. Okay, that's pretty good, I'd say. It's good enough for now, at least. Yeah. Definitely resembles a plane. From this angle, it doesn't actually look very good. So I'm going to take our camera and adjust it slightly. Maybe from this angle. Yeah, that looks better, I think. Maybe even higher. That's too high. Okay, good enough. Now let's actually get to scripting here, because as it stands, our game doesn't actually do anything. So, in our airplane, I'm going to add a component. I'll add my rigid body, disable the use of gravity. You could end up using it, but for our purposes, it's just the controls are going to be much more smooth if we disable gravity for now. And before I forget, I'm actually going to add a tag here for plane, and this is my second time doing this, recording this tutorial, so I already have the plane here tagged, but you just go ahead and create that. And then on airplane, we're going to go ahead and add a new script component, and I'm going to call it controller is fine. Okay, let's go ahead and get to scripting. We're going to use something, a character controller similar to that we used in the 2D game we just made. So you might see some similarities there. Let's go ahead and start by defining some things. I need the private rigid body, call that RB as usual, and I'll make a few floats here for, let's say, the forward speed. Oops, that's a float. Need to float a few of these. I need rotate speed. I need speed loss, which is going to be basically if our plane flies up in the air, we're basically simulating gravity here. I want the max speed of the plane to slow down, and when we go down, we want the plane to accelerate. I want a minimum speed, so this functionality doesn't cause our plane to go into the negative velocity relative to a forward direction. And then I want explosive force for when we actually go about adding our particle system. You'll see what I mean. And then I want to actually have a reference. No, I'll add that later. It's public game object explosion particle system. But we'll add that later. Okay. And in start, we want to define this rigid body. Oops. Get component of what type? Rigid body. Okay, now in update, as usual, is where the magic happens. First, we're going to worry about moving our character forward. And to do that, we're going to do transform.position. We're going to actually append or add onto the original position. What are we going to add? We're going to add the transform.forward, which just gives us the direction. Multiply that by time.delta time, so that way our game runs at the same, or our plane moves at the same speed no matter how fast your machine is, and then multiply that by forward speed, which is the magnitude that we're going to set in editor. Okay, let's see if that works. Should work, assuming we set these numbers. I don't actually remember what was a good speed. I think 60 should be good. Actually, I have them all written down here. 0.1 for rotate, speed loss is 50, and 35 should be a good minimum speed. Not sure about explosive force, but okay, that's a good speed, I think, for a plane. Maybe a bit fast considering how big our mountains are, but that should be fine. Now let's actually go about adding what I mentioned earlier, which was the sort of loss in speed depending on, loss or gain in speed depending on your Y angle. Okay, and to do that, we're going to actually adjust the forward speed itself we're going to subtract the transform.forward.y component multiplied by time.delta time multiplied by our speed loss. There's not really an easy way to actually, obviously we can't test this out unless we add our controls in, so let's go ahead and do that next. Actually, no, part of this functionality is actually setting our min speed as well. So if our forward speed is less than our minimum speed, this part's pretty self-explanatory. If we reach a point where our speed is less than the minimum speed that we're setting, then we're going to clamp that to that minimum speed value. Okay. Now let's actually work on our rotation controls, and that's actually can be done in a single line here. That is transform.rotate. We're going to do input.getAxis, just like our 2D game. We want the vertical. Oops. Did I spell that right? Okay. Multiplied by, actually I'll just type them all out first. The second one will be the axis that I created, which I'll go over in a second, is roll and then horizontal. If we look in Unity, in Edit, Project Settings, Input Manager, you see that there's already this horizontal and vertical axis set up for input controls that have positive and negative buttons already, so like S and W, and A and D, but there isn't actually, so basically I guess I should have explained this first. When we press W, we want our nose to dip down. When we press S, we want it to dip up. When we press Q, I want, if you can imagine like a real plane, these rudders would turn left and right, and your plane would actually go this direction or this direction. And if you're holding A or D, I want the plane to roll, which means along this axis here, I want the plane to sort of move along the axis. And what I just called that roll. I had to create a new axis that's down here at the bottom. You do that by just increasing the size of this list here. It was 18 and now it's 19. Then I just manually input these negative and positive values here to Q and E. And I can reference that in script here with the roll axis. Okay, but these won't work by themselves. I need to actually multiply these by our magnitude that we set here for rotate speed. Okay, and this actually won't work first try because we need to actually negate the last horizontal axis here, because by default rolling left will actually turn our plane right, which we don't want. But with that, I believe that should be good. If we had our, yep, we have our rotate speed set. Okay, A will roll, A and D, S and W work, and Q and E. Perfect. So now I can go along here and move our plane, and that actually could be it for the tutorial for today, but I wanted to add a little bit more functionality. You can see that it sort of goes out of control as soon as it touches something. So what we want to do is we want to add in some, let me pull up my notes here. We want to add in some basic collision script, and so we can do that by referencing, as we all know, void on collision enter. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to utilize that tag that I mentioned a moment ago. If our collision.gameObject.tag does not equal plane, basically saying if we're colliding with something that's not ourself. And basically the reason I have to implement that is because these separate airplane parts here, actually I forgot to add them, but that's a good reminder. So if I had left these untagged, then the main body here would think that it's colliding with something and act as if it crashed. But since I marked these all as plain, it won't register a crash since this conditional is telling us not to. Okay, or to not worry about it. Alright, I'll throw in a little test here, debug.log. I'll say boom if we have a crash. Okay, and I'm going to mark this out in comments just so we can know exactly what's happening. The first step we want to do is detach the camera. And actually, before I write that down, I'll explain what we want to do. So let's say we're riding around our plane, we hit the ground. What I want to do in that moment where we hit the ground is, instead of just bouncing like that, I want our plane to explode, and I want the camera to like stop where it is. I want the plane to give the illusion that it's exploding, but in reality we just move the plane, or we get rid of the plane, and then we spawn in these particles that look like the plane is exploding, and then reset the game. And in this case, resetting the game is just reloading the scene. Okay, so let's mark out these steps in comments. So we detach the camera. We're going to activate the explosion particles. We want to lose the game, and we want to disable, in air quotes, the plane object by teleporting it far away. Okay, and the reason we can't just use the function destroy on the plane is because if we do that, our wait function that we're going to use to restart the game won't actually run, because by the time it wants to call the scene management function, the plane will be gone. So we actually have to keep the plane in the scene and active in the scene for those 2 seconds or so that we're waiting. Okay, so let's get this done. So to detach the camera, it's pretty simple. We've done that in past games. I think it's the 2D game. We just access the transform of this game object. We get the child. We get child number, I believe it's 0. Yeah, main camera is the first child object, so we reference that with index 0. And then we want to set its parent to null, which means detach it. Null is nothing, so setting its parent to nothing means it doesn't have a parent, and airplane is not its parent anymore. Okay, we want to activate the explosion particles, which means we can decomment this out here to have our reference to explosion particle system. I will use the function instantiate, which basically just creates or spawns an object in the world given a prefab, which is this explosion particle system. And now where do I want to spawn that at? This function has 10 different transforms here. The one we're going to use is this one, the one where it wants an object to spawn, a position to spawn it in, and a rotation to spawn it in. So the position is just the transform of our plane, and likewise the rotation doesn't really matter, but in our case it'll just be the transform dot rotation of our plane as well. Okay, and we'll worry about these two once we actually get the particle system working and finish off our tutorial with that. Okay, so let's see if we can actually get this to give us an error that our perfect. Yeah, well, perfect. The variable explosion particle system has not been assigned. Perfect. Okay, so now we need to actually do the fun part, which is creating a particle system. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. On airplane, I'm going to go to effect, particle system, I'll call it explosion particle system. I'm actually going to make this a prefab. Delete this one. Double click there. And yeah, I'll just edit it here. Oh, but before I do that, I don't want to forget to add it to our plane. So I'm going to go to airplane, drag and drop our explosion particle system right there, and now we can actually feel free to edit. Okay, so I have some, I don't want to waste all your time running through these because we talked about them in the last tutorial. So I'm just going to go ahead and set them to numbers that I know are pretty good. So duration 0.1, no looping, start lifetime 40 is pretty good, start speed is 1, start size, oops. These are actually, this is 1, the start speed, our particles can be a range between 1 and 10 will be good, and start size as well will be random between 2 constants. I'll make those 0.1 and 0.4. Make sure, does that look good? We can't see them. Okay, and then gravity modifier 0.2, simulation space, world, scaled, local, play on awake is good. All this stuff is good. Emission, we want not 10, we want 1,000, just like that. Perfect. Shape, we're going to want a sphere to sort of blast them everywhere. And radius 1.04 I found to be a good number. And yeah, that's good in that section. The next section was all the way down under collision, which we'll enable. But first, actually, I'm going to go to renderer, change these to meshes, and since our plane is just a white collection of cubes, this actually works out pretty perfectly. Instead of this cube mesh, actually, no, yeah, we like cube, but we don't like this particle system. We're going to hit the white box, and just like, okay, perfect. Okay, and now I'm going to adjust our collision. Up here we want to collide with the world 3D. The dampen is basically how much our how much we want collisions to reduce the speed of our particles, and I found that around 80% is pretty good. And I want double the bounce because I want nice little bouncing particles. You can't really see that too well in this environment, but when it bounces on the ground it'll be more apparent. And everything looks pretty good there. I'm going to go ahead and spawn one in right here just to test it out. I'm missing something. I think it's... Is it the gravity? I think it's the gravity. So, simulation speed. Oh, there we go. That's much better. So they were actually falling, but it was happening too slowly to see. So this looks pretty good. If this is next to our plane, when it disappears, it might look like our plane just burst into a bunch of white cubes. Okay, and now with that done, I think that's pretty good. Let's try it. Okay, our plane exploded pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and see. There was some problems there with the wings. I'm gonna go ahead and finish the rest of the code so that we can see if the problems persist afterwards. So to lose the game, actually, I'm gonna make a new function called, what do you know it? Lose. Okay, And what we're going to do is actually, all we're going to do in this function is start a coroutine. And what that does is it starts an enumerator, which will take in a integer for a variable of seconds, which will basically make something happen after that amount of seconds. It'll make more sense in a second. Our function will be called wait, and our parameters will be 2 seconds, because I feel like 2 seconds is pretty good. Okay, now we actually define that enumerator. enumerator wait, and for the parameters it'll be an integer of seconds. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. Oh wait, yeah, we're not returning yet. That's why it's wrong. So we can fix that here. Yield return new wait for seconds. Yeah. And we can pass in our seconds parameter. Okay, and after that we just want to restart the scene. So to do that we need to make sure we have our using tag here for Unity engine scene management. And now we can activate our function scene manager dot load scene manager dot get active scene, and we need to remember to actually get the build index, or the name would work. And now we just all we have to do is call this function. Okay, and then teleport the remaining parts of the plane super far away. Oops. Transform dot translate. Let's just say 10,000. Or we'll teleport it to negative 99,000 below the map. Okay, that should give us no problem. Let's see if that works. Perfect. You can see it looks, at the instant that our plane disappears, we spawn in particles of the same color to make it look like our plane has burst into 1,000,000 pieces, or 1,000 pieces to be exact. And that's that for part 1. I actually think it's pretty fun flying around. As always, feel free to reach out to me via email and let me know if you have any questions or concerns. And yeah, good luck working on your final project.